So what has happened is that in order to gain power, the Bhodroloks have conveniently formed a social coalition and a political coalition with the Muslims. Hello viewers, today's episode is about Bengal politics, and it's not the evident stuff that I'm going to talk about. Everyone has been having a really good time of entertainment, looking at all the rebel politicians changing blocks and people giving egg therapy to politicians and that sort of stuff, and cash being found deep underneath the ground. So that's of course a lot of fun, but the more substantive social phenomena has largely been overlooked by the mainstream media, and that's what I'm going to discuss. So when we talk about Bengal, we all think about the traditional Bhodrolok culture. Especially people from outside Bengal would think about the Bhodrolok culture. If you think about some of the mainstream news channels that were building up to the Bengal elections, they got a bunch of these so-called genteel Bhodroloks into a tram ride through Kolkata discussing gentle stuff about politics, having some chai and samosa in that process, and jhalmuri, for example, which is the flavor of the season. But one thing that has largely not been understood by the especially viewers from outside of Bengal is the sheer social change that has happened in Bengal in the last 15-20 years. We Bengalis, I'm a Bengali myself, so we Bengalis take pride, might be misplaced pride, and I think it is misplaced pride, but we take pride, that misplaced pride, in the fact that we're different from our neighboring UPites and Biharis or North Indians for that matter, because we don't talk about caste here, right? So if you come to Bengal, no one is talking about caste, but you would hear terms that are proxies for caste. Very clever proxies. For example, Bhodrolok, I would define Bhodrolok as upper caste. It's a much more genteel way of saying upper caste without sounding crass or casteist. And what is the proxy for lower caste? Chotolok, which is the counterpart of Bhodrolok. So Bhodrolok and Chotolok can be interchanged with upper and lower caste. So now that we have defined those terms, we need to look at the social equation that was prevalent in Bengal in much of its history after independence. Now, for example, if you look at Uttar Pradesh, for example, people who have been following the politics of India have long heard about the social coalitions. For example, you had a social bloc of MY, or Muslims and Yadavs in UP, which were a really dominant social coalition that won them a lot of elections. Similarly, the counterpart in Bengal, which no one has conveniently talked about for all these years, there was a counterpart in Bengal of that social coalition that was in power for the last 70 or 80 years after independence. And that social coalition in Bengal, equivalent to the Muslims and Yadavs in UP, is what we call Bhodrolok plus Muslims. So MY, substitute that for BY. Bhodroloks and Muslims, so BM. So over a large period of time, over a long period of time, the Bhodrolok community have dominated the cultural sphere, the social sphere, the institutional power, and the moral sphere. So they have pretty much dominated all the social spheres of Bengal, right? But in the last 20 or 30 years, the sheer exuberance and the demographic pressure from the growing Muslim community has been heard. And what has happened is that the Bhodroloks have, over the period of time, conveniently appropriated much of that social pressure by accommodating the Muslims in their culture of power. Obviously, they would probably socially still not include them in the same way that they would include each other. But in terms of political power, social power, instruments of power, they have started distributing it in the last 15 to 20 years. And that has gone to a much higher level since Trinamool gained power in 2011. And one thing that I would have to describe the psyche, or I would have to explain the psyche behind this sharing of power. Traditionally, upper caste or Bhodroloks for that matter have looked at Muslims with a sense of admiration, and understandably so. Muslims have been sort of admired for their assertiveness, for their exuberance, for their confidence for that matter, for their aggression in certain respects. And in a sense, Muslims have been admired as a noble other, so people that are different from us, but as someone that are noble and to be respected and sort of shared power with. Conversely, the Bhodroloks have looked at the traditional lower caste or Chotoloks in a way of condescension, in the sense that they are typically sort of docile, or in their estimate, a docile population who lack much of their culture, supposed culture, and someone that they can be paternalistic about. They can be talked about, but they wouldn't share power with them, or they wouldn't include them. So what has happened is that in order to gain power, the Bhodroloks have conveniently formed a social coalition and a political coalition with the Muslims, and thereby excluding the lower caste or Chotoloks, like the SCs or the STs or OBCs for that matter, outside of that power structure. Now that has obviously changed with the entry of BJP. Ever since BJP entered the political scene of Bengal in a serious way, they have built up that coalition, especially in North Bengal, to sort of bring all these subaltern sections of the Bengali society into their political umbrella. And that's the reason they have been building power in much of North Bengal. But what has happened this time is that they have been able to bring that same model to the southern part of Bengal, which has been a traditional bastion of TMC, and by extension, the political power of the Bhodroloks and the Muslims. What they have also been able to do is form a sort of social coalition with their OBCs, SC/STs, and a section of upper castes or Bhodroloks that have been clearly been discontented with Trinamool for a lot of reasons. For example, the cut money, the corruption, the political violence, and the overt communal appeasement that has happened. So a section of upper castes did start moving towards BJP in the last probably 5 to 7 years, since 2019. And that has actually won BJP the election. Now, if you are quite astute about the numbers, you would find that there's only a 4% difference in the number of votes gained between TMC and BJP. So what that tells you is that the people who actually cast their votes, a large section of the traditional Bhodroloks, okay, have still gone with TMC, along with the Muslims, of course. So the difference between the vote share difference is not that much. But obviously after the election, what has happened is that because of that public outrage against the TMC politicians, you will find that a lot of, a large section of upper caste or Bhodroloks who did vote for TMC are now starting to gravitate towards BJP. So what I would expect is that in the next elections that will happen, you'll find that the BJP would end up getting a lot more, or maybe a vast majority of the Bhodrolok votes, because of another phenomena which I'll discuss in another election, and that is the Bengali penchant for being with the strong. Bengali society is quite unique, so but that's a discussion for another day. But the interesting part here is that extended social coalition between the subalterns or the lower castes, traditional lower caste in West Bengal, and a large part of the upper caste Bhodroloks. Is this going to sustain over a period of time, or would we go back to that old model of power sharing where the Bhodroloks predominantly with the support of the Muslims would yield power? Now, if you look at the BJP's cabinet this time around, that clearly demonstrates the difference. If you look at Mamata Banerjee's political circles and her cabinet ministers and just the people hanging around her, you'll find mostly people from the Brahmin community, like a lot of Banerjees and a few Chatterjees and a few Mukherjees and a few Moitros, for example, and a few Kaist castes as well. But if you look at BJP's new cabinet or the ministers, you'll find a broad selection of people from different SC castes, STs, OBCs. So it's a lot more representative of the general populace of West Bengal. So that's a clear change that is quite visible, which no one can argue about. I would love to hear your perspective on this. This is obviously quite a new idea because people in Bengal don't want to discuss about caste. But just because if you hide your head in sand doesn't make the problem or the phenomena go away, right? So we got to deal with it. We got to have a healthy discussion about it, and that's the way to go. I would love to hear your reactions. If you have any counter arguments, please feel free to share it with me. I would love to sort of respond to you on the comment section. Thanks for your time. You have a good day. Thank you. Bye.